What is up, Flick fans? And today, we're talking villains. What is up, Spider-Man fans? Welcome back to my channel. I'm finding every excuse I can to keep this suit on. But today we are talking every Spider-Man villain, at least the major ones that we've seen in movie form, both animated and live action. Now, I did this list a couple of years ago in tier list form. I want to do it again because things have changed. So I need you guys in the comments down below letting me know, how do you feel about the Spider-Man villains? Who is your favorite, least favorite? How has it changed since No Way Home? And since we are talking No Way Home, there will be No Way Home spoilers once we get to those villains. So be sure you see the film. And if you enjoy these types of tier lists, I would love to redo my Marvel Cinematic Universe ranking this week. So drop your thumbs up if you'd like to see that and if you want to support this video. But let's get right into it. We have a lot of villains to talk about. I'm going to take this mask off. Yeah, that's better. Now, a few things off the top. We're only talking Spider-Man movies. I'm not going to include the Venom films because there's no real Spider-Man villain yet in those movies. And there are some minor villains like the Tinkerer, or kind of who they've set up for the Scorpion, that I'm not putting on this list. I'm trying to stay focused so we can move through this, but I will include some of the minor villains that I believe play a more integral role. So if I miss somebody, let me know where you would rank them down below. But we're going to start with the animated villains from one of my personal favorite movies ever, Into the Spider-Verse, and the first one is Tombstone. And here's kind of how his role goes in this movie. Wherever Kingpin goes, Tombstone goes. He's the right-hand man, the guy that, gets in on the action at a point, and there are a handful of cool scenes with him. I like his imposing presence. I like his voice. I really like everything about him, except for his role in the movie, which just isn't that important. And because of that, we're going to get this out of the way fairly quickly and put him on the meh tier. Not a bad role per se, and I don't dislike him, but he didn't do much in the film. And then we have another character that I can almost say the same thing about, and this is their version of Scorpion. Scorpion is an interesting character at his core, and like I said, they're kind of setting him up to use him for the future of this Tom Holland Spider-Man universe. Now that things have changed in No Way Home, I'm interested to see how that goes, because there are major implications. But this version that we got was a cool version, right? Because this Scorpion, the big old stinger, but you also have these robotic legs that he crawls around on. So he provides us one really great action scene. And beyond that, just like Tombstone, he doesn't have all that much to do. Now, if there was a cool tier, what am I doing? I'm creating the tiers. I could create one. But he would be considered a cool character. But in terms of, again, what he's doing to Spider-Man, other than that one really good action scene, and we don't really get a lot of backstory for him, unfortunately, he's another character that I have to put on the meh tier. Just not a lot to do in that movie. I know we're kind of off to a bad start here, but I still think they're interesting enough characters. But then we get into this version of Dr. Octopus. And when we first meet her character, voiced brilliantly by, hey, look! It's Agatha. It's Catherine Hahn. She's great. But I was so fascinated to see what she was going to do in this film. And, kind of knowing what version of Doc Ock this would be, and then getting that reveal and her imposing presence on Spider-Man, just as imposing as any of the male versions we've seen of Dr. Octopus. So I love that they were able to capture that. But also her banter, her dialogue in this movie. If it wasn't for Kingpin, I would say she was clearly the standout villain of one of the best Spider-Man movies of all time. So all of that being said, I truly believe that this version of Dr. Octopus is a great version of Dr. Octopus. I'm going to throw her on the great tier. An imposing presence, really fascinating character design, some awesome action sequences, and I say awesome, she gets close to that mark, but never quite gets there. So here's another character in Spider-Verse that plays a role at the beginning, and I would say on the same level of a role as Scorpion or Tombstone, but what this version of Green Goblin does at the beginning of this movie, it plays a huge part in the death of Peter Parker. That sets everything in motion going forward to where this movie goes, and it's really cool seeing this version of Green Goblin on the big screen, right? I've always, wanted to see this demonic, huge creature, this entity of Norman, in movie form that we've got in the comics and in the video games before. I believe it was, what was it, the Ultimate Spider-Man? We got that version. That was super cool. He's fun to fight, but not for Peter Parker because he plays a huge role in taking him out at the beginning. So because of that, not a lot of character development. I'm going to go one tier up on some of these others and put him on the okay tier. Also, I love the design of his character. I wish we would have seen more, to be honest with you. I want to go into someone who is just so good in this movie. We're talking the Prowler, a.k.a. Mahershala Ali, our future Blade, playing Aaron Davis, the uncle of Miles Morales. And here's what I did last time when I did this tier list a couple of years ago. I put him on the good tier because I felt like, since this story obviously gets cut off around halfway through the film, there's half a movie with his great version of the Prowler. So I felt like if we would have gotten a bit more, he would have been on the great tier. But going back and watching that movie several times since then, I've seen it around 10 times now. The more I watch it, the more I feel the presence of the Prowler and how integral he is to both Miles' story and just the haunting presence of this group of villains in the first half of the story. So, even though he gets half a movie and he may not have the screen time that someone like this version of Dr. Octopus has, I don't know, guys. I feel as if he does so much with so little screen time. So I may be, overdoing it this time around, but I'm going to put him on the great tier. And I think what caps off his greatness is that score, man. Every time the Prowler comes on screen, we get that awesome music. I think this is a really, really great character. And then we finally have Kingpin. This version of Kingpin, voiced beautifully. I mean, there are so many things to praise about this Kingpin. I think the biggest one is being able to stand on his own as a very different version, both the way that he looks, the art style, and the animation. Huge, massive, imposing, a great villain, one that takes on Miles, one that strikes the final blow on Peter, right? Because, he's fighting Green Goblin, but eventually it does come down to the fact that Kingpin kills Chris Pine. How dare you kill Steve Trevor? No, for real, though. I believe this version of Kingpin is a great character. And I don't know what is keeping me from putting him on the awesome tier. I think it's just maybe some of these other villains get a little bit more depth in these other movies, so I'm going to keep that spot open for then. But right now, we've got 3 villains on the great tier from Into the Spider-Verse. That's pretty impressive. We're going to move into the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man movies and talk about some of his villains. The first one is the Lizard. The Lizard, who obviously comes back in Spider-Man No Way Home. I don't think he was as good in No Way Home, both visually and just character-wise. He's just kind of there to, fight, pretty much. And a couple of lines when they're caught up in the beginning. But what I'm really focused on here is his presence in The Amazing Spider-Man and the fact that he does play a pretty vital role in the growth of Andrew's Peter. I like the relationship at the beginning. The thing for me about his character is his mission and his goal. And they kind of make fun of it in No Way Home. I wanted to turn the whole city into lizards. Jimmy Fox says, he's like, why'd you want to turn the whole city into lizards? I think that's really funny that they were able to make fun of that and play on it, because I believe that storyline in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 is part of why, it was overall not as compelling as some of the Tobey films, some of the Tom films, because the villain just wasn't as up to par. What he was able to do was to take on Spider-Man physically, so I thought the battles were really, really great. His turn, specifically him as a character turning evil, I liked to see that. So all in all, I don't think it's a bad villain. I just think there are some elements that don't quite work, which is why I'm going to put the Lizard on the okay tier. And then there was a Rhino. A Rhino that's so bad that they made fun of it in No Way Home, which was great. I loved seeing that scene. That was perfect. Look, there's no way around this. Paul Giamatti is a great actor. He really is, but he is so cheesy in this movie. I mean, what is he doing at the beginning? The accent and the fact he's like, I'm evil, I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to rob the bank. He's just kind of saying what he's doing, which is okay. But it becomes so overly cartoonish and provides for an interesting action scene at the beginning. I'll say that. But all in all, Yeah, this is going on the awful tier. There's nothing redeeming about his character. I thought maybe they would do it in No Way Home, but they just made fun of it some more, which makes sense. Then we come to Jamie Foxx as Electro in both the Amazing Spider-Man universe and now the MCU. And this one is probably the toughest so far because how I look at him in one movie compared to the other is different. I felt like his potential just wasn't reached in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and even though he gave some phenomenal battles, I mean, the battle in Times Square is still one of the coolest Spider-Man battles ever in live action, in my opinion, and his power set and his score that plays underneath, going back and rewatching that movie, it's fantastic. It truly is. But then he comes over into No Way Home, and a very different character. They even say in the movie, did you get a makeover when you came over? And I felt like instead of playing the character that we knew in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 as much, and sure, he's in a new universe, he was more so just being Jamie Foxx. All right, that's kind of what it felt like. And a couple of explanations there, further detailed, would have been nice. But I will say, I preferred that version. I thought he was more compelling. There was some nice comedy in there. I felt the turn was a bit too quick because he loses his power. He's just good all of a sudden. And this is part of why I'm going to rank him where I actually rank him, is he is a powerful being, and that is put on display in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but much more so in No Way Home. I mean, you can feel his presence. I thought the look that they gave him in No Way Home, much more comic book accurate and classic, was great. But comparing him to the other villains, except for Goblin, right? Anytime he was kind of getting mad and going crazy, I felt like scared. I felt worried because what he can do with electricity, it's imposing. And then you add in the fact that I preferred his character more so this time around. I think looking at him as a threat for both Andrew and Tom's Spider-Man, he ended up being slightly better than okay at the end of the day. So a little bit of a redemption here. I'm going to put Jamie Foxx as Electro on the good tier. Yeah, kind of surprising, but man, he is just a threat to Spider-Man. And then we have DeHaan as Goblin, this version of the Green Goblin in this universe. The main reason behind The Amazing Spider-Man 2 not quite working, I think it works better than it used to be honest with you. But not quite working is because they're just trying to do too much. They're trying to push the inevitable that never happened, Sinister Six, and Harry's turn. And I liked his relationship with Peter, but I felt like it was way too fast for its own good. Say what you will about James Franco's version, but at least there's a two-movie buildup. In this film, they have a couple of conversations, they come back together, and then all of a sudden, you get that drastic turn. And while his scene with Gwen Stacy at the end is still, I think it works, right? It's rushed, but you just take that scene out and look at it, and you kind of feel the imposing threat of what this version of Green Goblin is in that moment. So I may be different than everyone else, but I'm not going to sit here and say it's a bust all the way around, but I can't put it on the okay tier because that entire storyline, it did feel kind of thrown in there at the end of the day. So this version of Green Goblin goes on the meh tier. Then we go to the Sam Raimi films. And Sandman, looking at him as a villain, you know, kind of what they were trying to do. And I'm with Sam Raimi on this one, absolutely. Because Raimi came out and said, I wanted to do a Sandman film. Didn't want to do Venom. You can feel that while you're watching the movie. But this is the character that I wanted to truly tackle and give him a great storyline. Do him justice. And while there are a couple things about his character that were a little rushed, and I really do wish that movie, instead of focusing on all of these other things, would have went back to his personal life. We only get really one scene with his daughter. Maybe give him some moments by himself, trying to figure out what he's going to do. Some character depth and build-up that would have pushed him to one of the greatest Spider-Man villains of all time. And I feel as if the film would have been more focused, then it would have been able to do that. So I think Spider-Man 3, with all of its flaws, does a great job of building up Sandman to be what I always wanted to see on the big screen. Then he comes in No Way Home, doesn't have a ton to do, to be honest with you. Kind of like the Lizard. Both Lizard and Sandman, they're just kind of there. You could tell they didn't bring the actors to set. You got the voiceovers. But I love the fact that he came back to voice the character, and nothing that happened in No Way Home took him down a notch. I still like his presence. So I'm going to put Sandman on the good tier, guys. I think Sandman is truly a good villain for Tobey and sorta Tom more Tobey, though. Then we have Harry Osborn. Like I said earlier, a nice 2-movie build-up for this character to where in the 3rd film, he can come in and just wreak havoc like his father to avenge his father. Avenge me, is what Daddy says, and he tries but ultimately fails. It's just, the whole amnesia storyline was a bit... Yeah, I see what they were trying to do, but it was just kind of cheap, in my opinion. I didn't love what they were doing there. But when he comes after Peter and that battle that they have towards the end of the film, and then ultimately his turn, I know this is a villain tier list, so we're just focused when he was a villain, but that battle at the end, it is friend versus friend. And I guess in a way, friend versus foe. So I love how that shift works. Not everything works, and I do think Franco's presence, he's not as big of a threat as I feel that character should have been. But all in all, I think the storyline is okay. I think he as a villain is okay. It could be my soft spot for that portion of Tobey's movies, but I'm going to throw him on the okay tier. I just wish they would have handled a couple things a little bit better. So when you look at these tiers, you have the meh, the bad, and the awful tier. None of them are good, right? None of them are kind of what you want from that villain. But there are only a couple that I can look at and say they kind of ruin the flow of the film. Rhino was one of those. Unfortunately, Topher Grace as Venom was the other one. I feel as if Topher Grace was doing everything he could to provide us a good Eddie, and honestly, I think he's a pretty good Eddie. It's when he actually becomes Venom. That's when it starts to fall apart, and you can feel exactly what Sam Raimi has said for all of these years. I didn't really have a passion for this character, and I didn't really want this character in the movie. And if they would have been able to do a Spider-Man 4 eventually, maybe have Eddie just do Eddie things in this film and have that turn in the next movie, I feel like that would have been much more appropriate. Have the final battle just between Spider-Man and Sandman. Okay, that would have been awesome. But instead of doing that, you throw in Venom at the end. Doesn't really have a lot to do. Not as menacing or imposing physically as he should have been. And then the very quick death for the character. So all of those things come together to create an inclusion that just didn't really feel necessary. Again, I don't think he's a bad Eddie Brock. I really don't. He's almost like the opposite of what Peter Parker is. But as Venom, which is really what we're looking at here, as a villain at the end of this film, he messed up the flow of the movie. This is a big missed opportunity, and I truly wish it would have been handled better. Shocker's an interesting one because I look at this character, one scene in Homecoming, really just kind of the guy, underneath Vulture, that's one of his henchmen, but you look at what Shocker was in the comics, and he wasn't that at all. Shocker was his own big villainous presence. And, I can even point out Scorpion and Tombstone and look at them, and yeah, they're like the henchmen, but at least they were cool, right? At least they're kind of memorable, whether it be character design or one action scene or kind of just what Tombstone meant to that movie. Shocker, it's such a bummer because Shocker's one of my all-time favorite villains. I remember facing him in the SpiderMan video game and just thinking he's the coolest. And if you look at it, there's 2 versions of Shocker in this movie. And the fact that I don't really remember either one, and we're kind of focused on the latter because he had more screen time, I was originally going to put this on the meh tier, but the more I kind of talk it out, I just think Shocker was a big disappointment and didn't really have anything to do in that movie. All right, guys, now we're getting into what I like to call the Final Four. The Fantastic Four. Trademark. It's the first time anyone's ever used that name. I believe these are the 4 greatest villains, but where do they fall? What tiers do they go on? We're going to start with Vulture. And Michael Keaton's performance in this movie is spectacular. As simple as this villain is, and as, familiar as Vulture is as a character, because we've seen him countless times in comics and video games and stuff, he adds a new spin and a new edge to this character. And the fact that he realizes who Peter is and the fact that he's Spider-Man, but you still care about him because he has a daughter, he has a family, he's this blue-collar guy, he's trying to do good for himself and his crew. Yeah, he's doing bad, so he's still a bad guy, but you feel for him, and those are the best kinds of villains. And even though we never got that big action scene, that's my one thing with this character. I wanted a big, crazy action scene. We get the 3rd act, it didn't quite do it, but he's still around in this universe. We see him pop up in Morbius, so I'm excited to see what they're going to do with Vulture from here on out. But so far, so awesome. I'm going to put Vulture on the awesome tier. Just an absolutely spectacular villain, and one that added such an edge to that movie. Then we have Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. And, you know, I've seen some complaints about this character. One of my really good friends, he's like, I just don't like him, right? He's not very imposing. He's kind of whiny. And, yeah, sure, he's whiny. It's like, I didn't get what I want, so I'm going to turn on Tony Stark and do this against him. And you still feel that, oh, he's just a kid. You know, Peter's just a kid. I feel bad for the kid, but I have to do what I have to do. And I have to eventually and inevitably expose his identity. And even though I get people that look at Mysterio and say, he's not the best villain, I think Mysterio is an awesome villain. I really do. I think Mysterio is one of those villains that doesn't fight physically, but fights mentally. And those two scenes in Far From Home, where Spider-Man is experiencing pretty much everything we wanted him to through the illusion tech. Not the fact that he's a magician like he is in the comics. It's illusion tech, so that's a nice modern spin on it. It's still super cool, man. And Mysterio is one of those characters that I just love, because now we can look at what he was able to do, looking back on that film and say, he kind of set up everything that happened in No Way Home. And that, for me, is enough to put him on the awesome tier. And the fact that Jake Gyllenhaal is just a phenomenal actor, maybe my favorite actor working, yeah, that's another good reason. All right, we've come to Doc Ock and Green Goblin, the final two, and I'm looking at this list, right? And I'm not feeling too good about the tiers that we have, because it almost feels like I should add one more because of the presence and what these two characters mean to me. So let's go up here and let's add a tier above awesome. We're going to call this the all-time tier, because I truly believe these two villains are all-timers. Absolutely. Let's start with Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. And so I've kind of spoiled where I'm going to put them on the list. So you know what? Let's just go ahead. Let's go ahead and throw both of these on that tier, because come on, you guys know what's coming. There's no reason to hide that from you. They're both all-timers. Now, which one's better? Stay tuned for the actual ranking, but we'll start with Doc Ock, man. What he was able to do in 2004 is truly incredible, right? Because you love Alfred Molina's portrayal as Otto Octavius. He is such a good guy. You can tell he cares about Peter, that conversation, his love for his wife, Rosie, and all that his surroundings mean to him. And the fact that he's brilliant. Not brilliant, but lazy. Just brilliant. And you can tell all of those things. So then there's that turn and all the voices in his head and these tentacles controlling him. You feel the fact that he's trying his best to let go of that, but they continue to overtake him more and more until he turns into one of Spider-Man's greatest villains ever on the big screen. This is the best portrayal of Doc Ock we will ever see. There is no way that anyone's going to be able to overtake this, because I thought, maybe we would get a different version of Doc Ock eventually, but no. In No Way Home, they're like, we'll just bring him back. We'll just bring him back because there's no one that can do it better, and I will stand by that. Now, if we get a better performance, I'll be happy, but I'm going to stand by the fact that he is perfect casting for this character. The ultimate version of Doc Ock in live action. And then him coming back in No Way Home and not only getting that presence that we got from Spider-Man 2 and one of the greatest action scenes of all time, the train sequence, we get another sequence on the bridge. We've seen the bridge countless times in trailers, but it's great. And what he's able to do in mixing his power sets with 2021's technology, the VFX-wise, guys, I was geeking out just seeing that, what we saw in the trailers, and getting that fight with him and Spider-Man. But, we're talking about him as a villain, and he does turn good. He turns good in both movies, really. But when he's not good, that's when I look at him and say, he is one of the best and more challenging threats that Spider-Man's ever had to face. And I find that to be truly phenomenal. And I find his character to be just the biggest threat for the character of Spider-Man. That's why he's on the all-time tier, one of my favorite villains of all time. And then you have Willem Dafoe, who prior to this movie, prior to No Way Home, I probably would have put him on the awesome tier. Not an all-timer for me, because while he was great in Sam Raimi's movies, he wasn't on the level of Doc Ock. And you get that mask and his suit that kind of hides his emotions and his ability to emote and show what, you see that little thumbnail, what Goblin actually is using his facial expressions. But then he comes back. He comes into the MCU and still threatening as always, but he does away with the mask. You're able to see his face, and his turn in No Way Home when he goes from Goblin to Norman and then from Norman back to Goblin. And you know the moment he does it, when he's talking to Doc Ock and he says, we're going to become whole again, Norman. And Norman's just like, oh, you can see it on his face. And then he's like, Norman's on sabbatical. And you feel that in his voice, that rage and fury that comes back. I don't know what that impression was. Comes back and turns him back into Green Goblin. But not only that, man, we get one of the greatest Spider-Man fight scenes of all time. The brutality of what happens in that moment is just incredible. And then at the end, you know, Spider-Man, he's about to do what he does, and I love the fact that Tobey saved him, by the way, but it was spectacular. I mean, I've never felt that way about a Spider-Man villain, his presence in No Way Home, and the fact that he outdoes his 2002 performance is one thing, but takes it a step further and cements himself as one of the greatest villains of all time. Yeah, that's why I made an all-time tier, because he's that good. We're not done. We have to rank these villains, and let's get right into it, starting at the bottom with Rhino. There you are. On the bad tier, you know what? Shocker didn't really do anything to impress me, so I'll give Eddie the benefit of the doubt because, again, I think Eddie himself is fine. It's just Venom, the character, doesn't really do much. On the meh tier, let's throw Scorpion at the bottom. He has the least to do, followed by Tombstone, who I think maybe just a bit more dialogue in the film, that helps. I think that version of Green Goblin, potential, doesn't quite get there for me on the okay tier. You know, you could look at me and be like, Austin, come on, he's in the movie less than some of these others, but I love that version of Green Goblin. That's a soft spot thing for me, but he is going to go at the bottom there. I will put Lizard slightly behind that version of Harry because that version of Harry just has more to do and better build-up for two movies. On the good tier, Electro goes at the bottom because somewhat inconsistent versions of his character. Sandman at the top because Sandman is just really well represented in Spider-Man 3. On the great tier, let's throw the Prowler just slightly below Kingpin, but both are really great villains. I'm actually going to put Doc Ock in the top spot on that tier because I just thought that version was super cool and really, really threatening. Now, who do I put at the top of that spot? Am I going to put Vulture or am I going to put Mysterio? Even though we could look at Mysterio now as one of Spider-Man's greatest villains because he did reveal his identity. This is very personal, by the way. There's something about Keaton's performance in Homecoming that is just a little more endearing and, you know, figuring things out like he does and just being this guy that you want to feel for, you want to relate to, not as snobby and like, oh, I didn't get what I want, like the character of Mysterio. And granted, it makes for a great villain, but you feel more for Michael Keaton's Vulture. So that's why I'm going to keep him in third place, Mysterio in fourth place. But at the top, okay, this is like the most iconic battle ever. And I love the fact that we were able to see them interact in 2021. Okay, these two characters were on screen together, talking to each other. I can't believe it. Yeah, let's keep it like that, guys. Let's keep it like that. I'm going to put, and I've always said, Dr. Octopus is the best Spider-Man villain ever. He's always been my favorite until No Way Home. Because while he's amazing in No Way Home, Goblin steals the show, and that performance from Willem Dafoe in that movie, I've watched it 3 times now, it's going to go down as one of the all-time greats. Not only do you get his phenomenal turn and what he's able to do to Peter and, you know, obviously killing Aunt May, but beyond that, making Tom Holland's Peter almost make the decision to kill him, pushing him as far as his limits will go, and then some great action scenes in 2002, some phenomenal action scenes in this film. 2 battles with him and Peter that are top-notch superhero battles. Do I sound like a crazy person? Because I'm in love. I'm in love with this character. I'm in love with this character. I think he's just the best. And to see him emote, lose the mask, go with that iconic, classic look and feel, it's Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin or bust. He is one of the greatest villains of all time, and that case was made when that movie dropped a couple of days ago. There's my list. Wait a second. Wait, do you guys hear that? Someone's coming. They're coming through the multiverse. Who is it? Oh my god. It's Bully Maguire! Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest Spider-Man villain of all time. Bully Maguire. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. He gets his own... whatever this is. There's my list. It was such a difficult tier list to do, and I know statistically not everyone's going to agree with all of my choices, but I want to know, man. Start that discussion in the comments down below. Who's your favorite villain, least favorite, and how has this changed since No Way Home? Because a lot of these were able to come back on screen and do it again. Who are we going to add to this list in the future? It looks like we're getting a different version of Venom. Maybe. It looks like we're getting a couple of characters in Across the Spider-Verse. Maybe. So, you guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you big time. I'll see you soon.